Well, good evening and welcome to the program. The Rockefeller Center at Dartmouth College is pleased to host a Veterans Day program each year as part of the Dartmouth Veterans Day celebration. This year, the Veterans Day program is being co-sponsored by the Dartmouth Uniformed Services Alumni, a shared interest alumni group for armed service members and their families. DUSA is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization started in 2013 and dedicated to promoting the ideals of service at Dartmouth and supporting all those who put on a uniform in the defense of their country. I'd also like to acknowledge the president of DUSA, Nathan Brusky, is here tonight. I've personally been witness to the extraordinary energy that he has put into that organization, and he's done wonders in a remarkably short time. The John Sloan Dickey Center for International Understanding is also a co-sponsor of tonight's presentation, which will be about the subject of international environmental security. Just so there's no confusion, I am not your speaker. I am Bob Bauman, class of 1974 at Dartmouth. I happen to hail from the same institution in another sense as tonight's guest speaker, who comes from the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. There, I'm Director of Graduate Studies and a Professor of History. Tonight's speaker has been Dean of Academics and Chief Academic Officer at the Command and General Staff College since 2006. That institution is located in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, if you haven't been there lately. It's a rather interesting institution. The Command and General Staff College is the graduate professional school for mid-career officers, particularly from the Army, but actually from all of the armed services, a number of U.S. governmental agencies, and over 100 foreign militaries. Indeed, the alumni roles of the Command and General Staff College include 28 past or current heads of state, not counting Dwight Eisenhower, who is the American contribution to that role. The enrollment at CGSC, as it is commonly known, is about 1,500 and includes students from over 100 foreign countries. In any case, getting back to our speaker, Dr. W. ChrisKing, he's got a PhD in engineering from the University of Tennessee. He served 34 years active duty in the United States Army, retired with the rank of Brigadier General. During a substantial stint at the United States Military Academy at West Point, he helped create their environmental engineering program, and for a number of years chaired the Department of Geography and Environmental Engineering. He is among the founders of the Global Military Advisory Council on Climate Change. He's also an advisor to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, on that subject. Among the things that he's done in the course of his career include planning humanitarian relief operations in places like Haiti and Rwanda. He's also been extensively involved in tough projects entailing the disposal of chemical weapons and other dangerous substances. So he's done a remarkable range of things. He's also a teacher and very much enjoys interaction, and that's the way he intends to approach tonight's presentation. So with that, I give you Dr. ChrisKing.
Thanks, everybody. All right, let's see if we can get the... We have a saying in the Army, you got to be smarter than your equipment. So let's see if we can get this screen to come down. I've ruined myself. I've gotten touchscreen. Here. All right, come here, Joanne, please. She has taken such good care of me the whole time I've been here. There, okay, there we go. It should be loaded. There it is down here in the bottom. So it is already.
Oops, this one.
It's hiding back there.
Yeah.
There.
No, that's not it.
All right, try the, there we go. That is me there. All right. And then here. And as I mentioned on my preliminary announcement, we're not a big crowd. I thank everybody for coming tonight. I really enjoy these engagements, and that's what I want it to be. If you have a question and you want to discuss something as I go through there, raise your hand and try to let one of the folks with the microphones get to you so that they can get it recorded, and let's talk about whatever it is that I didn't cover well enough or you want to hear more about. Environmental security, climate change, water wars, and other scary stuff. I have done most of my work over the last 2 years in climate change, but I have been studying environmental security since I joined the faculty at West Point in 1991. I have a split personality is the way I see it. I have 3 engineering degrees, 2 of which are environmental, and I have, as you've heard, 34 years that I spent in the United States Army. And this kind of puts it in context. This is why we're really here tonight. Okay, you can tell which one is me. I'm in the back. I pretty much believe that you all are the folks there with the thing about climate change. Now, the guy on the right that's being quoted there, I'm pretty sure he lives in Kansas, somewhere out there. Climate change has brought into focus discussion about a broader topic, which is environmental security. And what I want to do this evening is wait a minute, did it skip one? Kind of do this. I would like for you all to be able to leave here with kind of an understanding of what environmental security means contextually. Have your own definition. To appreciate the relationship between key environmental parameters and security and stability in the world. Because that's what environmental security is really wrapped around. Now, being an engineer and a pragmatist, I tend to work with real examples, not stay in theory my whole time thinking about things. So I have a case study on Afghanistan that describes how environmental security analysis is conducted. I have a case study on the Nile River that shows that there are really big, scary problems in environmental security that don't involve climate change. Climate change will make it worse. But I think that's particularly interesting for some in this group because there's so many public policy implications in understanding something like the problem that I'll describe for the Nile River. And then I'm going to have a case study on the Tibetan Plateau, which is directly related to climate change. So I'm going to try to get a lot of things into a fairly short period of time. At some things I'll go a little bit faster so that we can try to get through most of these. But if we don't make it all the way through, that's okay too. We want to do a more effective than just an efficient job here. And then we want to consider what climate change means to the future of the United States. So now I need to go back. The first 10 years of my career in environmental security work was about trying to convince mostly the military established that this is something that they needed to be thinking about. Climate denying was alive and well within the Department of Defense. It was even real, it was none of their business and we didn't have to worry about it. I've got enough stuff on my plate that I don't have to worry about. That is not the case anymore. And here's where the public policy part starts. Understanding the structure of how defense thinking is conducted in the United States, start with understanding that all the things that we do in the military are controlled by direction of the executive branch of government. And on a regular basis, the President of the United States produces the National Security Strategy for the United States. Every 2, 3, 4 years, depending on when he or she thinks it needs to be changed, they rewrite the National Security Strategy. Anything that's done in the military should have a direct link back to the National Security Strategy. At the top are quotes from the current National Security Strategy. The danger of climate change is real, urgent, and severe. Now, we who wear uniforms, no matter how many stars, we don't have to guess. It's not our decision about whether we're dealing with climate change anymore. We have been directed by the President. This is good news for me. We now have policy and direction to follow. Well, what happens after the President produces the National Security Strategy? Then the Secretary of Defense will produce a document that is the National Defense Strategy, and the individual departments of the Army, Air Force, Marines, Navy, and Coast Guard and such will produce their own versions of interpretation of what they do as their part of complying with the National Security Strategy. So it all threads together. Now, the reason the cartoon was recently produced is because of this document here. Within the last couple of weeks, Secretary of Defense Hagel released a document that's called the Department of Defense 2014 Climate Change Roadmap. The first document directly from the Secretary of Defense that directs the departments to do certain things in response to climate change. And so you saw one of the responses that came out was the cartoon that now the Department of Defense is in the climate change business. We should have been for a long time, but we're now starting to respond to that in policy and guidance that comes to us to then implement. Now, I teach a class in this to majors at the United States Army, and I read through the roadmap, and I was a little bit on the skeptic side, and it didn't say everything I would like for it to say and everything. But my students straightened me out. It was magnificent. They said, "Get over it, sir. It's a start. You know, it doesn't have everything, but at least it's a good start. And it says some things that will give us a reason to start the work that needs to be done." So now the argument about whether it's a defense and security issue is over. Now the hard work is, what is it that we need to do? So what I want to do is talk you through so that you understand kind of the strategic implications that environmental security causes around the world. What are some of those things that I call the big scary parts? And then finish with climate change. You did that? First of all, there's two components to understanding the concept of environmental security. The absence of conflict is not sufficient. We're looking for something better than that. We're looking for stable human communities that are sustainable. That is the best condition that we would hope for. That's certainly what we hope to achieve for the United States in our defense strategies, maintaining peace and security of the world. The second part is human-induced change is causing environmental change, which then produces threats to stability and security. And it really goes back to that second quote from the National Security Strategy. Our big goal is to promote human dignity. If you can maintain that level for most of the people in the world, then you're going to have a more stable and a more peaceful condition. Things that move us away from that condition become environmental security threats. I didn't think this up. When I got into this, the first thing I did is what every good researcher should do, and you did a good, strong literature review to see what had been written before, what do we already know about the subject. This is the best quote I have ever found, published in The Environmentalist in 1986. Places like Dartmouth, Yale, Harvard, some universities in Canada, and then Cambridge and Oxford in England were studying environmental security issues in the 70s. It had reached a state where Norman Myers, one of the leaders, made this statement in 1986. And notice climate was included in there even in 1986. The progress since that time is what has been the problem. We have not ever really been able to get our hands and attack the problem in an appropriate way. That's a whole class in itself why that happened. And it's a public policy issue that you ought to look at sometimes, because it's a really interesting, intriguing set of conditions that cause that not to happen. Now, I'm a physical scientist and an engineer, and I approach my analysis from the science side. There's also an equal number of social scientists and political scientists that do environmental security work. And they approach it from the social science, the good, the governance kinds of things. There's only one thing that we absolutely agree on, and that's that population is the independent variable. The stress is caused by the population that has gone from 2.5 billion people when I showed up to 7.2 billion people today, and is going somewhere in the 9 or 10 billion. Anybody that doesn't believe that that's having some impact on a global scale on environments, I'm probably not going to be able to help you. But what are the impacts, and who are the people? You'll notice the choices of my headings: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Everybody remembers where that came from. All right. This is part of how I used to try to convince the military that it was a requirement of their job to pay attention to this. This is, we all take an oath, support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We never, in my whole career, paid any attention to domestic. We didn't have to. We didn't worry about what was going on. All of our threats were external. The threats are those things that deny people the basic life-sustaining conditions. Scientifically, I should use Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. And his first base level is the same thing as life. Somewhere between the second and the third level then you get to the liberties, and the pursuit of happiness is his nirvana, seventh phase. It's the same thing. Maslow wrote it in the 1950s and got a lot of accolades for it. It was in the Declaration of Independence, the hierarchy of human needs, when we decided for us what was worth fighting for. That was what we told England was worth fighting for us. That's how I put the two together. I was trying to figure out to the military to explain to them. There's this classic saying I use a lot, not usually in this. It comes from a guy named B.H. Liddell Hart. He's a classical historian, strategist, and very well respected. But his most poignant statement to me was that he said the only thing that's harder than getting a new idea into the military mind is getting an old one out. And my experience supports that very, very strongly. So teaching the Army that they have something that's not a force on force, that's not a fight, that's not a conflict, that's not a peacekeeping, that they're going to have to deal with is hard, hard work. But now that's been taken care of. And what are the life-sustaining things we're talking about? It comes from the land, it comes from the water, and it comes from the air. It's the basic environmental conditions. Now, we're not sure exactly which ones we're going to measure and stuff, and that's the hard work I've been doing for a while. But changes to these things can affect the life-sustaining capability of a region, of a country, and eventually the world. And that's the basic premise of environmental security. So providing those conditions of basic human needs is what defines environmental security. Oh, by the way, the pictures I have there are from my last deployment in Afghanistan. So I have, if you want a place where environmental security hits you home, it's living and working in Afghanistan for a while. It is the most devoid of progress place that you will be on. It is the 1700s and headed backwards fast. But with a wonderful group of people in the dominant species. I loved working with Afghans. I trusted them. I just felt so sorry for the conditions that they live in and what they've been exposed to over a long period of time. That young lady was my favorite young lady. She was at this, that's a water well. That's what they drink. So the first thing I did as a sanitary engineer, I went up and looked down in it. There was everything in there, the trash, things growing. But you know, if you don't have clean water, then you drink dirty water. If you don't have any water, then you die. And that's the condition. Every time I was by this stop, it was off our base and stuff. She would be there whenever I went by there. Her whole life was going to the well, getting water, and taking it back to her family, and then probably taking it to other folks. That would be her life, and probably as she will know it. So, the first question is, In the hierarchy of human needs, considering there's 7.2 billion people on the face of the earth, where do you think most people spend their time? Life, liberty, or the pursuit of happiness things? It is my contention that a growing number of people, not percentages maybe, but of people, are in a day-to-day food fight to obtain the basic human needs. Food, water, the energy to cook their food, to provide basic sanitation, and freedom from disease. They're fighting that fight every day. As an example, 2 million people a year or more will die from dirty water. 2 billion people or more will get sick from dirty water. We were having a discussion in the business school this morning. There is nothing more debilitating to a nation, to an economy, than the amount of energy 2 billion people being sick regularly sucks out of an economy. All the money goes into just buying the medicine, just doing the sustainment. Trying to develop and get better and it's all sucked out of them. When people are sick, they're struggling, people are dying. It is a debilitating, a destabilizing condition, which can lead to then conflict and other kinds of problems. We'll get to that later. And this is where we live, and this is why the problem, one of the things we have to deal with is, and that's in red up there. How do we convince the developed countries of the world that's in their critical best interest to pay attention to what's going on in the developing world and the environmental security problems that are being created there? Not just climate change, but include climate change. There's an old environmental rule that's inviolable. It's always cheaper to prevent it than it is to clean up the mess. For a person who spent billions of dollars cleaning up the chemical weapons mess, and billions more in cleaning up the mess at Rocky Mountain Arsenal, which is one of the big environmental disasters from the Department of Defense. It's always cheaper and easier to prevent it than it is to clean it up. But we got to take that as a philosophy. Anything yet? Nope, okay. This is why it's important that I go around and do things like this. That's a public policy issue. How we spend our treasure and what we're going to value, and particularly what we're going to value in what we do with others and for others. And the point is that for our own security, this is money well spent, whatever we spend the money on. And then we as environmental scientists and policy people have to figure out what is the best way to spend that money, because sometimes we don't spend the money well. So I'll let you read that quickly. But it has to be a process that's actionable, that produces results that make things better. It's not just defining and understanding that it's there, but you have to be developing processes that works towards solutions.
I have a question.
Please. Oh my God. The reason I said that is that's my sister. Never. And I'm so glad she came.
Is part of the problem here? Is part of the problem here changing it, because the military has always been a confrontational or for confrontation with other countries or other ideologies, or protection, but has never made that leap to realizing that part of protection is providing, how do I want to say this?
A broader definition of security,
Yeah.
is what you're really talking about.
But becoming peacekeepers, becoming change agents, bringing medical supplies, and it seems like that's contrary to the way the military has been.
Well, I'll give you a case study to answer that. I came back from the Rwanda mission in 1994. I wrote about a 25-page, what we call an after-action report of what we did, what were the good, the bad, the ugly of what went on there. And I presented it to the Army staff, and they went like, we don't do that anymore. We had a term we called military operations other than war, MUCHA. We have to make an acronym out of everything. I guess we can't remember the words or something, I forget. But they said, we don't do MUCHA anymore. That's not our business. And I assured them that it was their business, it was our business, and we weren't going to get out of it. And oh, by the way, if we did it right, we could learn a lot from that. I mean, we shipped the supplies, medical services, protection to the middle of Africa for 1 million people and sustained that for over 6 months. That is one of the greatest logistical training exercises known to man, in being able to set that up. But we learned from that, but we didn't learn the lessons that we should have. But the reality is back to Liddell Hart. Getting those new ideas into a mind is only second to trying to get the old way of business out. And it is one of the endearing qualities of the military. That means we get to be better and better at what we do. It's a little hard to teach the new tricks, though. I teach a class for this of 24 hours, about 20 I spent on the science. I put this up just to show you these are the kinds of issues that are more complete about understanding the science of environmental security. It is about understanding water as a scarce resource, both the fresh water and the oceans. Even in the air domain, it's more than just greenhouse gases, but there are other factors that are environmentally adverse in the air environment that we have to worry about. For example, there are many places in the world where the air is so nasty you can't breathe it. That's a tough go. I've seen pictures of Shanghai and Beijing during a nice warm summer month. They're all wearing masks. They're not helping. They don't keep, all they keep is particulates out. What they have are problems with gaseous emissions. Land use issues are major issues in different places of the world. Deforestation, desertification, those are major issues. Exacerbated by climate change, but they're really being driven by overpopulation in certain areas, misuse of lands, and those kinds of things. Those are environmental security problems. Those are extreme because the land does not recover. Once you lower the carrying capacity of a piece of land by overusing it, the time it takes for it to recover is in geologic time. It's not in human time. You wouldn't even be able to count the number of life cycles you would have to go through for an arid environment to be able to recover if the soil's lost. These are all the kinds of environmental issues. In my personal experience, there's places where waste disposal is a major effort. They so contaminate the land with disposing of toxic chemicals that it's uninhabitable. Chernobyl is an example of that, but there are just as many where it was done with industrial pollution. We in the United States were very bold in what we did in the 1970s by implementing fairly stringent environmental regulations. And we didn't have it right at all. We probably did inefficient things and wasteful things, but we built an environment that actually protected and restored many of our natural resources over the next 20 years. There are places in the world that are still living in the 1950s in the way they do their industrial operations. And over the long term, those produce significant environmental concerns for them. Now, environmental security analysis. Let's do a quick environmental security assessment of the land of Afghanistan. And why do I do this? Because we're in a war in Afghanistan. And one of the things that you get when you're in a war, the first thing the boss will ask you if you're a strategic planner is, what is the end state? That means, when do I know I've won and we can go home? I mean, that's about that simple. So to get to the end state, we got to get to some sense or some place where we could call it stable enough and secure enough that we can exit without the high likelihood that we're going to have to return there and be embroiled again. Does that sound like some other place we might be, like Iraq? So, when I do an environmental security analysis of the parameters that I measure to determine what state a particular place is in its environmental security, I measure the population, I measure drinking water, sanitation, solid hazardous waste, arable lands, forestation, rates of changes in those kinds of things. So this is the database that I built for Afghanistan. It puts it in the top 5 in the world as awful. the worst places in the world. First of all, the big driver, as I told you, the independent variable is population. Look at the population statistics. 8th highest fertility rate in the world. Every woman in Afghanistan will average 7 children. A good number of them will die before they're 5, but they will average 7 children. Infant mortality rate, you see there, the median age, the life expectancy, we're at 83, 84, 43. Huge number of young people, the average age very low. Huge challenges in building a sustainable condition for the people that live in Afghanistan. And oh, by the way, the population will reach 44 million by 2025. Almost double. That's what that kind of growth rate will produce. In the social science, they produced the thing called the Failed States Index that's based on social, political, governance kinds of things. Afghanistan is 7th in the world there. I put it about 3rd in the world behind Sudan and Somalia for the worst environmental conditions that exist. Of the countries that are in the top 10 failed states, 9 out of the 10 are in the top 10 in failed environmental conditions. The only one that's in the Failed States Index, now at number 9, that shouldn't be there by the environmental issues is Iraq. And I would posit that they had other issues that put them in the failed states list. But they were 3rd in 2007, they're 9th in 2011, and they may or may not move out of the Failed States Index. But the correlation between environmental conditions and failed and failing governments, there is no other explanation of why the two are the same list, except that environmental security issues are destabilizing in their impact on those countries. And for us, particularly when we talk about Afghanistan, our ability to rebuild and reach that end state in Afghanistan is challenged by the environmental conditions. I had a doctor that just finished his master's thesis with me. His analysis was we spent $91 billion on health care facilities and structure in Afghanistan over the last 10 years. He measured the health metrics that he would use that would describe the health of the population, and there was zero change, zero improvement in the health of the Afghan population over the last 10 years and the $90 billion. Maybe we should have spent it on sanitation, more water supplies, building water resource management process, and maybe planting 25 million trees to start recovering some of the lands. Yes, young lady. Oh, got a customer, got a customer. Hi.
So you even just mentioned policy proposals such as sanitation and improvement of facilities, but also if we're talking about population and that really being the independent variable exacerbating all of these environmental security issues that are so destabilizing, is there an entry point in policy that comes from family planning or any sort of population controls and addressing that as the root factor?
I think most of the science in the world and the people, and this is not me, but the people I've talked to that I believe work and study this well, said the primary impactor that we should be considering is women's education around the world. That's what I have been told by the people who study that. Providing an education to women is the best hope that we have to be able to break the cycle that exists now. And actually the doctor's analysis came up with the same thing. If we want to impact Afghanistan and their culture, you have to get into the family unit. And in that culture, the family unit is run by the woman. So, but we don't do anything about that. In fact, our policy has been that is not something that we do. Not the Army, I'm talking about us as a nation. Many private entities do those kinds of things, but it's very, very hard because they're, the biggest non-governmental institution is so small and compared to what governments can do. So, does that help? Okay, good. Thank you. Very good question. What are you going to do about it? That's a good question. Now I want to do a case study of the Nile. This is the public policy, guys. You ought to enjoy this one. That is the geographic map of Africa. All right. Anybody know where that was drawn? If you do the whole continent of Africa, and when?
1970s.
It's actually drawn in Berlin, Germany. I think it was about 1810 by a bunch of the colonists, the European powers, and an interesting tidbit of that, not one of them had ever stepped foot in Africa when they divided up the continent. And we have lived with the chaos that was created since. But we're studying the Nile River, and that's what's of interest to us. And the river does not care. It likes watersheds. Please, sir. Wait. That was the only rule they gave me that I have to follow. And I'm military, and I like following rules.
I'm questioning your statement. The Berlin Conference of 1885 is when Africa was divided up, and it sure didn't have Zaire and Tanzania.
We've done some piddling with it, but...
So you're only 85 years out of date. Where is this map from?
This map is this is a current map. But it doesn't even, not even current because it hasn't put in South Sudan on it yet. I couldn't find a good representation that showed South Sudan. But I'm going to go back and check because the Berlin Conference, it was well before 1880, wasn't it?
1885.
Okay, I'll trust you for it. My geography is bad. I apologize. But this is what we really have to look at. The green, darker green, is actually the watershed. Now what I've done is, over here I've annotated the amount of rainfall that occurs across the watershed. So we see the water mostly comes from the tropical regions down here. It gets more and more arid as you go north. And then here are the annual flows in billion cubic meters of water per year. Now recognize what actually happens is they have a strong spring runoff from the flows, and then it drops off. So a lot of the water comes within about 3 months. So it's not a nice even flow. Most rivers aren't. So most of the water is created in Ethiopia, Central African Republic, Uganda, Kenya, down here in the water-rich territories, flows north until it gets to Aswan, and I want to point that one out. Aswan in Egypt is the dam that was built, please help me, sir, in the 50s? I think it was in the 50s. The Russians built it for the Egyptians. The reason I point that out is that is the point coming off of the bottom of the Aswan Dam is where Egypt measures how much water they have that flows to the rest of the country. The irony is, of all the weather stations in the world, the weather station at Aswan is the 5th driest place in the world. On an average, measured to hundredths of an inch, the annual rainfall at Aswan in Egypt is 0.00. They have less than 100 an inch a year, average there. It's the Sahara Desert. It's pretty dry. But Egypt relies, depends, and survives on the water that's there, none of which really fell on their country. I had 2 students. One was from South Sudan. South Sudan is the lower part of Sudan where it says the Sud, Juba is the capital and stuff. They actually have some water there. The South Sudanese student had been a child warrior. He had been in the South Sudanese army since he was about 12 years old. And then his country became a country in 2011. We celebrated it on July. His master's thesis was that if South Sudan didn't get their fair share of the water, their country would not survive. It would not maintain its independence if it did not get its share of the water. The other was done by an Egyptian officer. And he assured me, I tried to write it nice and smooth and everything and be very politically correct. He assured me I was wrong when I wrote that it was a contentious issue and it really needed to be resolved between the nations. He says no. He says Egypt will go to war for their rights to all the water in the Nile that they need. And if you read the papers any time in the recent time, you've heard some saber rattling between Ethiopia and Egypt about what Ethiopia is doing to build dams and water diversion and better use of the water that they have that's actually generated in Ethiopia. Now, from a public policy standpoint, what happens to us as the United States and our interest in that part of the world if Egypt goes upside down and conflict breaks out among all of those different? I mean, Egypt's what we depend on to be kind of a voice of reason in that region. Even scarier is if you were to add the impacts of what happens in the Tigris-Euphrates, the water diversion that's going on in Turkey. Here's where it gets worse. Here's the 140 billion cubic meters per water that's currently under demand from the countries that use the Nile. Now, I took South Sudan and I gave them their fair share. I said, they got this many people, they ought to get that much water. They may be fighting over that, but we'll see how it goes. So currently there's 265 million people that get by and they use 140 billion cubic meters a year per water. Under the current projections, by 2050, there will be nearly 700 million people in those same countries. And if you just use the same rates of use, you would need 230 billion cubic meters of water to satisfy that demand. Please, sir. Wait a minute, here they come. The best we can guess is there's 140 billion cubic meters of water in it. And remember, that's the total flow. That's not what's usable because of floods and stuff like that. And climate change will probably make it less. Sir.
Well, that was my question. Most of the climate change projections say that wet areas will probably get wetter and dry areas will get drier. So isn't it possible that the watershed might actually increase the amount of water it gets because of climate change?
It's possible, but the predictions there are, it's kind of, we use macro scale estimates right now in the IPCC work. The drier areas, the temperate are definitely going to get drier. How much more is collected and ends up in the Nile, that's still a little problematic. So it's a very good question, and I put, you won't find IPCC addressing that because unless there's a high certainty, they will not report something. So they would say that's probably medium probability of occurring. Okay, good question. Thank you, sir. That's scary. 700 million people as opposed to 265 million people. That's still a lot of water, but things have to change. This one is the big scary one to me. And if you read national security studies right now, the National Security Agency and two other of the intelligence community folks have put out recent reports saying over the next 25 years, the real worry is water. There's an old saying out west where I live, whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting over. That's attributed to Mark Twain. Nobody ever proved that. I heard actually a real scholar use that quote here about 3 weeks ago, but it's not Mark Twain and it's not Will Rogers. We don't know who said it, but if that becomes a world scale issue and 700 million people involved, it's a worry. And that's an environmental security issue. Oh, by the way, for the young folks, CIA Fact Book is a very credible place to get all kinds of geographic and other kinds of data. Just because it's CIA, you don't have to. They're really good at finding out stuff. Now, I want to specifically shift now to climate change. No, that doesn't have anything to do with climate change, but I've always liked that picture, so I use it a lot when I get it. You know, envision yourself, that's where you've got to go. And those are your hazards that you have to deal with. I'm not going to go over that. I saw a show the other day where Jon Stewart was talking about congressmen who were talking about climate change. I need to go do it for some congressmen because they don't understand basically what the greenhouse effect is about. But I'm not going to worry about that here. What I've got now are a couple of slides, and I call them just the facts. Just the facts, because these are not interpretations and predictions of the future. This is what has been measured as change to this point in the IPCC's work. Let me see here. The fifth report, assessment report from the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I think that's an amazing process that's going on, in my personal opinion. People from all over the world, scientists, have gotten together and they have worked to try to understand, and where they don't understand, add to the body of knowledge about how our climate works. And for 20 years they have been collecting data, studying that data, developing new ways to understand it better. And it has been a real positive to show that we could actually talk and work together if you actually were forced to do it or encouraged to do it. I, working for Cambridge University, went through the 2,000 pages of science, my eyes are still crossed, trying to determine the defense implications in that data set. And so what I'm going to share with you first are the facts. The atmosphere has warmed 0.85 degrees centigrade over the data set 1880 to 2012. Now see, as a security person, I don't have to get caught up in is it natural or is it man-induced. And if those changes cause stresses to the environment that then create threats to people, I have to worry about that. That's my defense mission. What caused it, I can let other people worry about. The second thing in the second set of slides will be about what is predicted for the future. There we do have to deal with the credibility of what's going on. But the first two slides just talk about the data that's been collected. They show the changes in the atmosphere, the changes in the ocean. The one that's particularly worrisome to me personally is the changes in the cryosphere, because that has the major impact on water resources, as you'll see from my example. And then sea level, and then the greenhouse gases. When they use the term extremely likely, and I pulled that out, that means they've done a probabilistic analysis of the data, and that's at least 95% probable from all of the data stuff. They're very precise. Likely, highly likely, extremely likely, I think are the three terms or three levels of certainty they have on something that they will actually write as we believe that. So it could be possible that half of the change is driven by natural change, is what they're saying. But at least half of it, they believe, is extremely likely to have been caused by anthropogenic change. Ma'am.
I came with this question, and I've been waiting to see if you've gotten to this. Do you have any hope that in the U.S. people will get beyond politicizing the issue of climate change so that action might occur?
Yes, ma'am, I do, but I don't know what level of pain we're going to be willing to suffer before we get to that eventuality. And that's the problem. Every environmental decision we make is a public policy issue. How much pollution we're going to allow in the air, how clean the water has to be before it's legal and safe, according to SAFE. That doesn't mean it's safe, it just means we have established what we're willing to pay for. We haven't reached anything conclusive yet. It's going to be a while still. But that doesn't mean we can't do actionable items right now. There are things that are really easy to address where we've got enough science, enough understanding, and enough new technology that we can implement it. I'll give you a great example from the Department of Defense. I just had a Marine that just finished his master's thesis. He's a Marine guy who does petroleum and supply in the field. He did the math and did the calculations, and we worked, And he found out that he can save 180,000 gallons of fuel in 1 month for one Marine battalion deployed in Afghanistan, just by making changes of stuff that we already own. Better generators, better HVAC systems, some more. But here's what it really means. It means that 46 trucks don't have to go from the supply point down a dirty road to that forward operating base. And that's probably 150 soldiers that don't have to be involved in a convoy and aren't targets out there on the road. So it saves millions of dollars in a month, and it makes life safer for some of our brave troops. We're going to do those things in the Department of Defense because we'll figure it out. But I think it'll have to be a bottom-up swell. The people decide what we're going to do. I know. This is an example of the temperature map. This is what it actually looked like. Where got the warmest? Not everybody got to 8, 9 degrees. Some places in the world got a lot warmer than that, up to 2.5 degrees centigrade overall annual warming. Some places, one place especially, got a little cooler. No, right there, right below the inlets, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And not that great a real estate. And then here was the map you were talking about, sir. But it's of a macro scale. So being able to figure out in Africa, see most of the numbers that if you look at the drainage area from the Nile, most of them show losing water. But that's still not enough definitive for them to fall on their sword and say water's going to do this, that, or the other. Okay. Now what I did was I took, you're not going to have to read this because I'm going to blow up a couple of them. I took all of the things that are the climate changes that are going to occur. Temperature warming, extreme temperature, increased drying, which is critically important for agriculture, extreme precipitation, higher numbers of tropical events and such, just changes in precipitation, changes in snow and ice cover, cyclonic and sea level. I took each one of those and then I said, what are the key impacts? How do they affect the human domain? And then from that, then I went over and said, what is the security and defense implications? What do I need to train and prepare for? What do I know are going to be my future missions based on doing this work? So let me blow one up. Go ahead, ask your question. So snow and ice cover is one that's scary to me, and I'll show you why when I do my case study. But that's a blow up of that particular row.
Just really quickly, almost all of the security and defense impact conclusions showed increased humanitarian support missions. Is the military well equipped for those humanitarian support missions, or would there have to be a restructuring of the type of military education?
For this kind of work, we are better than FedEx and UPS and everybody else together. If an event gets that large and you dial 911, it will be the U.S. Department of Defense that will have to answer. Because working in those austere environments and being able to pick up massive amounts of stuff and move it around and be able to handle logistics at that level, the Department of Defense is better at it than anybody else you will have. The Air Force to be able to do with the big moves, the Army and its logistics systems, the Marine Corps and their logistics system. We may not be the perfect, but there is no perfect, and we're the best choice you got. That was one of the reasons I told my bosses that they could say they're not doing Mutra all they want to, but it will not be true. When the president says we're going to go, he said it on Saturday, on Sunday we were planning. That's the way it's supposed to be. Snow and ice cover. This is the predicted stuff now. By 2100, 15 to 85% of the ice cover in the world is lost. The ice cover on the Arctic disappears during the September months. No more cover in ice, completely open. It reestablishes itself during the winter. The amount of snow lost on the land masses, which are primary water sources for massive amounts of people, is gone. So then, stresses on water resources, increased warming, flooding, and droughts. It causes both. That doesn't seem fair, but it does. And so here's what the military has to deal with. Those are the threats that are created by that. That's the kind of analysis that we go through to get to the big so what for us. And it's things you were just talking about, young lady. We have to be able to do those. And we'll probably have to change some of what we do to be able to respond to them depending on the magnitude of those events. And my last case study, and then I need to finish up. That is the world's best water resource management project ever built. Of course, we didn't build it. It stores the ice and the snow up in the in the wintertime, collects it up and then releases it in kind of an orderly fashion. And those rivers are perennial sources for fresh water, agricultural water, for 3.2 billion people. Nearly half the world's population is served by that one beautiful system that's fast melting. These rivers are all just dominated. The longer rivers like the Mekong and some of the others, half of their water comes from snowmelt. They're a little bit less affected, but most of those rivers are majorly affected. From a security point, I then go on to the second analysis is those are three of the biggest armies in the world that do have problems already, and they're all nuclear powers. China, Pakistan, and India. More people under arms than any place else in the world with a full nuclear armament capability. The commander, the four-star general that manages all forces in the Pacific, made the statement at the bottom fairly recently. He gets it. And he's going to have to react to it, and he knows that. I'm going to skip over that one and that one. I need to just put up the summary. Security is much larger than just having all the guns you need. And that's the change of the middle. There's people that, HUA? People say that's a military mind snapping shut when you hear that. And maybe that's true. That's hard change for military. We would rather do the things that we have done for a long time. I think the thing I would finish with is, particularly for the policy folks, so how do we as a nation deal with these issues and get our hands around this stuff? Actually, the process that's already built and in place to define security threats to our nation, do the analysis to understand what it means, and to develop solutions and start moving down that road. The only one we have is the defense approach. We call it a threat analysis. We do the courses of action. We go through and do a significant amount of analytical work to really define and understand those problems well. And so the environmental security kinds of issues are probably going to be best posed through that system. The Department of State doesn't have stuff like that. The other arms of government don't have that analytical process already built and in place to make decisions and to make plans and then to operate and execute on plans. We are only a part of a whole of government solution, though. Probably not even the biggest part of what needs to be done by the United States to respond to the challenge of climate change and other environmental security. I only represent kind of the defense thinking about that. So, ma'am, it's got to be Department of State, the Department of Agriculture, the Treasury, and all of those other people got it together to work a more holistic solution to that, with us participating as we should as the Department of Defense, because we're the ones that actually say we will support and defend the people of the United States. I always end with that one. I love this one because there's three things in there that are wrong, absolutely wrong. Intentionally, two of them, and one of them I'll pick out. First of all, it's culturally illiterate, right? Yo, amigo, like that. Secondly, protect us from the greenhouse effect. Well, we just pointed out the greenhouse effect is what keeps us alive. It's our problems with messing with the greenhouse effect that have caused the problem. But the last thing, and you can't pick it out, is the thing that's really wrong is that was drawn in 1989. And it's still valid and reasonable to show it here today. So that gets to the problem that you addressed, is when are we going to get about doing something about this as a nation? I've overstayed my welcome, but I'd be glad to answer any other questions that you all might have.
I've got a question, if that's okay. Hi.
Go ahead.
So I actually have two questions. So sorry, I can speak up. It's okay. So one of them is I'm just curious as to how you see the role of the Arctic playing into this. I think that's a really interesting thing to think about, because people talk about Arctic security now, and that's a new big thing. And then this sort of ties into my second question, which is, oftentimes we're talking about climate change in terms of its impact on global security, because it's going to cause instability in parts of the world where there are already other tensions. But very often, and this also goes back to your last image, we don't make the connection that that instability is being caused by things that we are doing at home. And it's nice to see a government agency actually talking about climate change. But I'm curious as if to the Department of Defense, if there is any talk at all about how this is connected to domestic issues that we're doing, or if that's sort of something that's out of the realm of
We do not.
what you do.
The only domestic issues we address are what are the things that internally for the operation of defense forces that we need to deal with. Places that we own that are going to be flooded, places that we own that are going to be stressed by some of the environmental security issues. But the internal politics, no, we're going to stay way away from that. And we should, because we have to respond to whoever you all elect to be our masters. I support and defend the Constitution, not any particular person, but whoever constitutionally has put in authority over me, I swear that I will obey the lawful orders of those people. And it gets too complicated. I don't need to be making decisions about what I like and don't like about what I'm being told to do. What was the first question? What? The Arctic? The Arctic is going to be a mix between opportunity and conflict. Opportunity as to who gets those resources that have now been made available over there. And even scarier, who gets them without screwing the whole place up by using the wrong technologies and the wrong approaches to recovering the oil and the minerals and the other resources that are up there. The conflict is about who has the rights for sea travel, and what are the rules that apply up there, because we've written no rules. There is no international law that covers it because it's always got ice on it. But now it doesn't. So there's international law work to be done. The international law that has been written that covers resource boundaries, fishing, and all those other things are not explicit. And there's a lot of work that's going to involve 6 or 7 major players. Russia has been sailing a boat around a Norwegian island here recently because they've claimed that as part of their landmass. And you know, they sunk a flag on the North Pole. There was no ice there at the time, so it went to the bottom. But that is the political message to us, that they have to be counted as players. Okay, yeah, anybody that needs to go to class, get out of here. I'll stay as long, but I know you all have places to go and people to see.
I think there's also a reception going on.
Okay, we'll do one more question from this gentleman, and then I think they have Chewies out there that we can visit around and eat those too. So, but let the students that need to go. Thank you. Appreciate you all coming.
I, sir, want to understand a little more how you operate and how your office operates. We have, 16 intelligence agencies in our government. We have interaction with UNEP, United Nations Environment. So are you basically a data gathering organization in which you then analyze what's going on out there? Or
no.
are you basic science?
My job has nothing to do with what I'm talking about today. I'm an academic dean at a large military professional school. My nights and weekend jobs or my professional research as a scholar and as a faculty member there is in environmental security. It's been that since I was on the faculty at West Point. That has always been my scholarly. That plus managing exotic toxic military waste.
But there is an Office of Military Security dealing with environment?
There's pieces of it around. It's in an OSD, Office of Secretary of Defense activity, and I work with them, but just in an advisory role and talking to them and reviewing some of the things they do. It's really very, very minimal, what has been created.
That's what I'm trying to get to.
Yes, sir, you're right. Again. Anything else? Okay. I think we have a reception if you care to join. Thank you, everybody.